I think we're good to go.
I have the text to say the recording has started.
Okay, good evening. My apologies for a slight technical glitch there. My name is Paula Reid, Mayor of Kingborough, and it is my pleasure to welcome everybody here to tonight's council meeting on Monday, the 4th of April 2022. We have temporarily gone back online, as you can all clearly see, as we've been impacted by COVID, and so have a number of our staff. So to everybody who's watching along at home on YouTube, a warm welcome to you this evening as well. It is now 5:36 p.m. and I officially declare this meeting open. I wish to advise that council meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website, and in accordance with council's policy, I will ask the Acting General Manager to confirm that the audio recording has started.
The recording has started.
Thank you. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Our attendees this evening are myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor Councillor Westwood, Councillor Bastone, Councillor Cordover, Councillor Fox, Councillor Gladwright, Councillor Midgley and Councillor Street. From our staff this evening, we have the Acting General Manager, Dr Stevenson, the Acting Director of Governance, Recreation and Property Services, Mr Basham, our Manager of Works, Mr Johnson, our Program Manager for Transform Kingston, Mr Kamatsoglu, our NAB Coordinator, Ms Quinn, our Media and Communications Advisor, Ms Adams, and our Executive Assistant, Ms Morton. We have apologies from Councillor Grace and Councillor Wass. Of minutes. The motion is that the minutes of the open session of council meeting number 5 held on the 21st of March 2022 be confirmed as a true record. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. I have a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Gladwright. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Motion is carried unanimously. Still on page 1, workshops held since the last council meeting. We had a workshop on the 23rd of March, which was a half-day budget workshop, and we also had last Monday evening a workshop on the 28th of March, significant trees, and also a budget workshop. Turning now to page 2, declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a declaration of interest that they'd like to share? No, thank you very much. Transfer of agenda items. Is there any item on the agenda that councillors would like to transfer from open into closed session? No, thank you. There are no questions without notice from the public this evening, as the meeting is being held online. Questions on notice from the public, and if you do wish to submit a question on notice, you can do so by sending it through to us via email at kc@kingborough.tas.gov.au. We had one question on notice. It was from Mr Ross Kyle. It was an application to vary a condition for DA 2014-304 with an officer's response from Ms Tyler Moore. Turning now to questions without notice from councillors. Does any councillor have a question without notice? Councillor Gladwright and then Councillor Cordover.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm aware that the mayors of Greater Hobart met recently and there was some discussion about ferry terminals. I know that some community members are interested to hear about a proposal for a ferry, if there is any ferry terminal here in Kingborough. And I think Margate has been floated as potentially the best option, but I was just wondering if you could let us know some more details about that.
Yeah. So as part of the Hobart City deal, the mayors meet regularly. So that's the mayors of Glenorchy, Hobart, Clarence and ourselves. As part of that, we put in a joint submission to all candidates in the federal election for some of the priorities that would relate to the city deal, where we believe that the federal government could provide some funding. While we did indicate within a number of priorities that we were hoping to extend the ferry network, at the moment those priorities for that election bid were confined to those areas where there was, in the opinion of a range of people, existing infrastructure that could be easily utilised for ferries. I believe the difficulty, for example, of Margate is the use of the existing facilities, but also the location of it in terms of where the ferries would have to come around. So what we put forward was actually just a starting point for the discussion. What we really want to do is now bring the state government on board to have a proper look at a comprehensive ferry service. And there's no doubt that Kingborough should be considered as part of that. I believe it would be a great thing to be able to travel by ferry to work rather than travelling up the southern outlet, and that many people of Kingborough would probably share that. One of the challenges, though, is having those ferry services in a location where there can also be parking, and that's the challenge. So there's I guess the question of the infrastructure, the route that the ferries would take to be the quickest, because that's a consideration for any ferry operators, but also then where do people park to get to the ferry, or what are their public transport options to get to the ferry. I know that there is a bit of concern over on the Eastern Shore about sections of Bellreeve and streets around Bellreeve being clogged up as people do a bit of a park and ride for the ferry. Ultimately, of course, what we want is people to be able to get public transport there to connect with the ferry to then, so that cars are taken out of the equation. So there's a number of factors. In one of our the Greater Hobart Mayors meet monthly, and in one of our upcoming meetings we do have on the agenda to talk to people like Bob Clifford, who obviously has operated a ferry service for Tasmanians before quite successfully. He's got some opinions on that, what the future of ferries might look like, because there is possible that there will be electric ferries in the future. So I'm quite excited about it, provided we can get all the options and all the ducks in a row, so to speak. But whilst it didn't come into this initial lot that we put forward, it's certainly not off the agenda by any means. It's something that I am very keen to see, and I can see from the nodding around the table that many of the councillors are as well.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Cordover and then Councillor Bastone.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions. My first question is about the gun dealership soon to be operating next to Margate Primary School. So in today's Mercury newspaper, in an article by Kenji Sato, they were reporting concern about a gun dealer operating from next door to Margate Primary School. And the final paragraph of that Mercury article in today's newspaper reads that gun dealers need approval for a licence, but they do not need approval from their local council to set up business. End quote. So firstly, is that true that council has no involvement in people dealing guns in our municipality? And secondly, does council have an official position on whether or not it is appropriate, in our opinion, for firearms dealers to be operating next to primary schools in our municipality?
Personally, I don't believe it's appropriate for a gun dealer or a firearms licensed dealer to operate directly next door to a primary school. There are tests when licences are put out about whether it's in the community interest for, say, gaming or liquor, and there are restrictions around the location next to primary schools and childcare centres and other areas that might be in the public interest. I don't believe it's in the public interest in this regard. The situation with this particular application was that there is a retail premises operating at that location. It's the old church in Margate next to the primary school. They had a retail licence, and it doesn't matter whether it's retail in the traditional sense that we might consider, as in selling groceries or food or shoes or something else. That is exactly the same as retailing guns, apparently, according to the planning laws. And so there was no change of use required. I find that quite unbelievable. I did write last week to the Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Management, asking that in this case that the Commissioner for Police review the licence being provided for that premises because the school community is very concerned about it. I've also asked that the legislation surrounding the granting of these permits be changed to have consultation with councils, but also to specify that locations adjacent to schools are not appropriate. I don't understand why it would apply for liquor licensing and gaming, but not for firearms. So I did receive a response from the Minister today. It was not a satisfactory response. It did not answer those the points that I put forward, so I'll be seeking some further clarification.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a really helpful response. And my follow-up question was going to be about how we lodge our official opposition or our register our complaint, but it seems like you've actioned that already, and I look forward to hearing what comes back when you persist with this matter, because I think it really is important. So thank you for that, Mayor. My second question relates to the General Manager's diary. So the two things I was interested in were, firstly, on the 9th of March, the meeting with the representatives from the Callis Group to see if there was any information regarding Margate. And then the second question I had was about Zen City, and just I assume that meeting was part of the Kingston CBD Transform Kingston CBD project, but I just wondered whether there was anything else worth reporting from that meeting. So the two items are the Callis Group meeting and the Zen City meeting.
Thank you. I'll ask the Acting General Manager to answer that. She is not actually on a tropical beach. That is just a screensaver behind her, but it does look very nice. Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'll start with the Zen City one. That was one of the senior managers was in Tasmania. Zen City, we have a relationship with them to support our communications and engagement work in a range of ways, and they were taking the opportunity to inform us of some new parts of their service, including that they have recently acquired a citizen engagement platform that we will look at how we might be able to utilise here, and can provide us some strategic advice in terms of reviewing some of our tools. So it was a stakeholder relationship meeting. My advice from the General Manager regarding the meeting with the Callis Group was to further the discussions around their plans for Margate, and this week I reached out to Mr Bygraves, who works for the Callis Group, to invite them to formally submit any requests they would like Council to consider in relation to moving that development forward.
Thank you for those answers. And through you, Mayor, I'd just like to reiterate how important it is that we get some action there. People have waited far too long. So it should be a use it or lose it kind of approach, but I'll leave that for another day. Thank you, Mayor. That's all from me.
I've now got Councillor Bastone.
Thank you, Mayor. My question relates to the Woodbridge Hall. The Woodbridge Hall is approved to have 85 seated patrons, but it only has 65 chairs. And an application to the council to supply an additional 20 chairs was met with you need to apply for a community grant. Seeing that the hall is a council asset, I'm wondering why the community needs to go through the whole rigmarole of applying for a grant to get the 20 chairs for what is a council asset.
Thank you, Councillor Bastone. I'm just looking along our list of staff. Dr. Stevenson, could you assist us with that?
I'm afraid we'll have to take that one on notice with Mr Smee on leave at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bastone. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question in regards to the Kingston bypass duplication and Algona Road roundabout upgrade, noting that consultation occurred in December. I'm wondering if we have any updates in regards to that.
Dr. Stevenson.
Through you, Mayor. I don't believe that Mr Johnson will have the answer to this one either, so we'll take it on notice.
Thank you.
Our apologies. As I mentioned earlier, we have been impacted by COVID in quite a few ways for this meeting, so a number of our staff are not with us as they normally would be and be able to answer that. So, yeah, apologies. Any further questions without notice? No, if not, we will move on. Thank you. There were no questions on notice from councillors, so we turn now to page 3. Petitions still being actioned. There's a report on a petition headed upgrade to car park, Taroona Bowls and Community Club, and that will be provided at a future council meeting. Still on page 3, petitions received in the last period. At the time the agenda was compiled, no petitions were received. We now move to officers' reports to council. Kingston Main Street design options with a recommendation on page 8. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. A mover in Councillor Street and a seconder in Councillor Gladeright. Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very pleased to move the recommended motion and take another step towards what's an incredibly important project for Kingborough and an incredibly important project for Kingston as well. As many would be aware, as part of the Hobart City deal, Kingborough Council was given significant funding to the value of $7.9 million for the purposes of contemporising our CBD and Main Street. As part of that, we engaged a project officer specifically for the project, and the outcome of much consultation and design work has been the recommendation that's before council tonight. It is, as is always the case, a compromise between the needs of many different parts of our community and many different users of our CBD and our Main Street through Kingston. But Mayor, I think it strikes the right balance. Mr. Kaimatsoglu and the rest of council staff are to be congratulated for all the work that has gone into this, notwithstanding the fact that there is a lot more work to go to get this project to fruition. And I should note as well that there's a lot more work, in my view, for councillors and council to do in terms of the contemporary policy setting and direction that needs to take place to turn the hard infrastructure works that much of this project and what we're looking at tonight relates to into the contemporary CBD that Kingborough deserves and the contemporary CBD that Kingston needs. So the hard infrastructure that we're looking at tonight, in my view, is just one part and will be worth little unless councillors and council now work really hard, hopefully tonight, after we adopt this recommendation and design plan, to make sure that our policies and direction are set so that we make the most of the money that we're spending on these works. I look forward to hearing the debate around the table this evening, or the virtual table this evening, and I commend the motion to council.
Thank you, Councillor Street. I keep muting myself because my cat keeps meowing. Now in order, I think I have Councillor Cordova, then Gladeright, then Fox, then Bastone. So hopefully I've got that right. So Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor, and sorry to jump in before the seconder of the motion. I think this is a really important project, and it is signals, quite rightly, as Councillor Street says, the next step in what is crucially important for the whole municipality, but of course for our CBD, and also it will have important impacts on the rest of Greater Hobart, because as we know, that's part of the city deal in the first place, was to reduce congestion, and it's part of a broader vision. So I think it's really important that we note the survey that's taken place, in which there were some 742 responses from the general public, as well as 14 responses from business sector stakeholders. Now, there are various options that are contained within the report, and then there's the officer's recommendation. And so I thought it would be useful at this stage, early on in the debate, to ask a few questions, just for those who aren't who don't have the report in front of them. If we could hear perhaps from Mr. Coglotz. Forgive me. If we could hear about the various options. So my understanding, as you can see in the report from page 6, we've got option 1 with some street parking, option 2 where there's not that level of street parking, and then we've got a hybrid model, option 3, which basically you can see it on attachment E. It involves the construction of option 1 as an interim solution with the conversion of the southbound lane on-street parking to outdoor dining and public open space at a later date. So if we could please hear what are the main differences between those 3 options and how we came to those options.
Mr. Clement-Soglu.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Cordova. The main differences between the options, as you said, revolve around the parking. So option 1, which is the recommendation, is to have an uphill painted cycle lane, which is 1.9 metres wide, which is wider than the Australian standards. It includes a 400 mil wide buffer zone to alleviate the chances of cyclists getting doored from people leaving their parked vehicles. The cycle lane then continues on past the outside of the bus stop, which is adjacent to the Commonwealth Bank, and then links up with the existing on-road cycle lane at the traffic signals near Banjos, which continues through to the southern parts of Kingborough. So the option 1 has 10 on-street parking spaces outside the existing restaurants on the southern side of the Channel Highways, and then it also has another 10 parking spaces created on the northern side of the road, which are now available due to the relocation of the bus stop to number 40 Channel Highway. So that's basically option 1. Now, listening to the feedback from the community and from stakeholder groups, there is a desire for separation between motorists and cyclists. So, but also listening to the feedback from our business community, the plan would be to have a staged approach where option 1 is, as I mentioned, currently we have the 10 parking spaces outside the restaurants. 3 of the restaurants have only been open for a period of around about 6 months. So obviously they are relying on their all sorts of generation of income from foot traffic and parking, etc. However, as we see Kingston grow, and definitely central Kingston, we see that there's going to be a lot more foot traffic and a lot more people living within central Kingston, which means those businesses, as the project evolves and as Kingston evolves, there'll be a lot more foot traffic, and those businesses won't be as reliant on the parking down the track. Therefore, it gives us an opportunity to repurpose those 10 parking spaces on the southern side of the road to on-street dining and to public space. Could be artwork, could be street furniture, seating, water fountains, etc., that kind of thing. And then we can put a buffer on the outside of the existing painted bike lane, which will then create that separation, at least through that first bit of Channel Highway, so from the Hutchins Street roundabout, which is in place at the moment, through to the Channel Court entry exit, and then the on-road bike lane will continue on the outside of the buses. So it allows the business to flourish for the moment, but also with a second stage approach to give us that extra protection for cyclists in the future. So that's the option 1 and recommendation. Option 2 removes all parking on the southern side of the street from the outset. So you'd have a 3 metre wide, or a little bit over 3 metre wide footpath. Then you'd have a 1.8 metre wide protected cycle lane against the curb, and then there'll be a buffer, an island with some vegetation, which will give protection between the cyclists and the vehicles. That cycle lane then continues through the entry and exit to Channel Court, and then continues on the inside of the bus stop. So what happens there is the cycle lane will ramp up to footpath level and become a shared space It'll be still a dedicated cycle lane. However, the cyclists would have to yield and give way to passengers exiting and entering the bus. And then once the cycle lane gets past the bus stop, it ramps back down to road level and then links back up to the existing painted on-road cycle lane outside of Banjos. Through that particular section near the bus stop, the council is looking to put the new bus shelter set back from the existing footpath, which will give us a 3 metre clear space of footpath for pedestrians who are not catching the bus, who are just accessing the street up and down Channel Highway. And then you'll have around about a 1 to 1.2 metre bike lane through that particular section, and then another 1 to 1.2 metre landing for passengers to step on and off the bus. So they're not actually stepping into the cycle lane directly, which is very important for accessibility issues, and obviously trying to alleviate any kind of conflict between cyclists and pedestrians, which is, obviously if we don't want to increase the amount of conflict between user groups. So that's what happens through that particular section. So on the other side of the road, everything is as per the original option. So the bus interchange or the bus relocation to Channel 40 Channel Highway, the in and out of John Street becomes left in, left out only to make it a lot safer for pedestrians and for traffic calming reasons. And then the new parking on the northern side of the road. So the main difference between option 1 and option 2 is the fact that option 2 removes all parking from the onset, and it has the cycle lane going on the inside of the bus. This is a treatment that's used around multiple cities around the world, and is also known as a floating bus stop. So then moving forward, after additional consultation with businesses and other stakeholders, including the cycling groups, an option 3 was created, which is a hybrid of both options. So basically, in a nutshell, from Hutchins Street through to the Channel Court entry and exit is exactly the same as option 1. So we've got on-street parking, an on-street painted cycle lane to be converted to a separated cycle lane down the track when the on-street dining is created at whatever date is chosen. And then once we get past the Channel Court entry and exit, we can then divert the cycle lane onto the inside of the bus stop and create that floating bus stop arrangement that I mentioned in option 2. So option 3 is, option 1 with the parking to be removed at a later date, and then the floating bus stop treatment outside where the Commonwealth Bank is at the moment.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's clear.
It's a big help. So the way that I see it, I think it's important that we recognise that the majority of the general public did actually want to remove that parking, but the business community in that area, and quite understandably, because they're in a very fragile part of their business, 9 out of 10 small businesses fail within the first few years. It's very important to them to have that parking there at this initial stage of their business. But of course, we need to, as councillors, recognise that we are functionally making a choice no matter what we do, because we're not going to make everyone happy. And my personal preference at this stage would be to recognise the majority of the general public who would like to see a transformation of their CBD that is significant, and that all of the major urban, all of the urban designers that I've been listening to for the past, 2 decades have all been saying what we want to try and do is get cars out of our CBDs to help people stop, stick, stay and spend, to help people have a CBD that is beautiful, that is green, that is walkable, that's good for active transport. But of course, we need to recognise that without those small businesses there, we wouldn't have much of a CBD in the first place. So what we councillors are doing tonight is recognising that trying to find a balance between those two desires. My personal feeling is that we actually will be incentivising cars to go into the CBD if we leave those parking spaces there. And the reason I say that is this: even though there will only be 10 on-street parks, people will start doing blockies in order to try and get those spaces. So those few spaces that are available, it won't be a disincentive for people to come into the middle of the CBD. They will want to do laps to see if they can get to those spaces, when in fact there's plenty of parking actually within Channel Court. There's no shortage of short-term parking within the CBD. Now, I realise that there will be a difference of opinion both among my colleagues and in the general community, but I need to make it clear, I think, from my perspective, that I want to choose the general will of the community, of the general public, rather than the will of those small businesses. And there is a conflict here, and we need to find a balance. And I realise that not everyone will be happy. My preference would be for to try it with parklets and to try that kind of hybrid model first. And then if the small businesses require that short-term parking to come back, if they clamour for that short-term parking to come back onto the street, well, then, of course, we could discuss removing those parklets. But at the moment, as is proposed, we're actually leaving the parking there. And then at some future date, which is as yet unspecified, that's when we're going to take the street parking away. But of course, in 2025 or whenever we do end up trying to take that street parking away, we will, I anticipate, get the same response from small business, which is no, leave our parking directly out front of our shop front. So I realise that we're in a situation where we need to make a choice. And in fact, this is the opportunity to make that choice, because the grant deed only lasts for so long. And it will be a difficult choice. And on this occasion, I will be supporting the majority of the general public, those 742 people who made their views clear, as opposed to those 14 businesses who also have a very legitimate reason for making the choice that they have. But on this occasion, that's where I have to side. But I'm really open-minded to this, and I'm willing to hear out the other councillors and be convinced in one way or another. But that's just my personal feeling at this stage. So thank you so much to Mr. Kemetsoglu for all the work that you've done. And I know that this is an ongoing iterative process, and we will continue to work for the best outcome for the entire community, and that includes the business community as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. I've got Councillor Gladright next.
Thank you. Look, I'll be speaking in support of the recommendation tonight. I echo what you say, Councillor Cordova, about striking a balance, and I think there are quite a broad spectrum of interests here, and I feel like the recommended option has struck a really nice balance. It allows for that cycleway to go through, but it allows for some parking as well to serve those small businesses that are indeed just starting up. Over the next few years, there'll be many, many hundreds of people moving into the central Kingston, and those small businesses will indeed benefit from that foot traffic, and they probably won't require those car parking spaces directly outside their businesses in a few years' time. So for me, this recommendation strikes a really good balance for where we are right now, and it's allowing for us to take into account the changed circumstances of the CBD in a few more years. So for right now, I'm supporting the recommended option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gladright. I've got Councillor Bastone next, and then Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we're deciding on one of three options to finally transform the heart of Kingston, and all of them are compromises. The decision's been many years in the making, and I personally worked with a group which included Bruce Smee, Daniel Smee's father, in 2005, 2006. And the plans and suggestions that we had then were quite innovative. There was buses would have been diverted from the main street. The area was more opened up, more friendly. The opportunities have arisen here with council for us to move the service station from where it was and to make John Street a one-way street. I think in every case that we've looked at, the councillors have voted on compromises there too. And as they say, fortune favours the brave, and we have not been brave. I think we've now got so many restrictions in place that a really innovative plan for Kingston is impossible now. And what we have been able to achieve, I think, is amazing, that we have even been able to achieve what the designer has organised for us to choose from tonight. We need to make a decision tonight, or else we will lose our funding, certainly. The state of the Channel Highway and the footpaths at the moment are terrible. We've let them lapse and lapse and lapse, hoping that we would be very quick to get something, anything built. But I think in the interests of getting everything done now, we must make a choice of one of these three and not continue to prevaricate on it. And I think I will be voting for the recommendation, the option 1. I think it's the best solution for what we've got, not the best solution we could have had, but for what we are now left with. I think that's the best solution. So my vote will be for the option 1.
Thank you, Councillor Bastone. I've now got Councillor Fox and then Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. I guess it's taken 30 years to come to this stage, and I do say that at the moment, the intersection between Hutchins Street and Channel Highway is working really well. There are some very good improvements which are already slowing down the traffic, making it safer for pedestrians, and having more pedestrian crossings is going to improve that situation and slow down the traffic and make it more people friendly, which has been the long-term view of this council. They've had an enormous vision for all those years, as Councillor Bastone says, and their vision has been to make it more pedestrian friendly, more cycling friendly, and to reduce the number of cars in the main street. I guess it's really important to recognise that we have purchased property along this street, especially on the northern side of the street. Let's say the BP side of the street, to enable the widening of the footpaths and to be making outdoor dining a possibility in the future. And also, we've been visualising outdoor dining and having wide footpaths for people to perambulate along that street. I would really like to see that go ahead now, and I realise that by choosing option 1, we're choosing a wish and a promise for the future, because there is no timeline set here. It may take a long time for council to achieve off-street car parking in high-rise car parks, for example. But if you look at the current studies we've done on car parking, there is adequate car parking in Kingston right now. And a lot of those businesses that are asking us to provide on-street car parking have got the opportunity for car parking behind them. And there are lots of streets in that area where you can just park as long as you like and just walk and buy your coffee or buy your takeaways. And in fact, by having less cars and less parking, it's going to make it a lot better. There's examples in Geelong where this has occurred, and those businesses were crying out and saying, no, we want people to park right outside our door. But when the council helped them get car parking behind their businesses, they accepted that, and now their businesses are booming. They've got far more business, everybody stays longer and spends more money, and there's a much more relaxed atmosphere and people are attracted to that area. So like Councillor Cordova, that is my preference. And I realise we might get there in the long term, but what worries me that if we go with option 1 at the moment, we're putting our cyclists at risk. And a lot of the people who've responded said, well, there are no cyclists, but the trouble is it's not safe for cyclists, and that's why there are no cyclists. But we are building cycling paths that come into this area from Whitewater Creek, from Kingston Beach. We're putting in an underpass to connect the wetlands and the Firthside area to this area. We're building a lot of footpaths and connections into the Kingston area. And if we had cycling paths, people would use them and children would be safe on them. But what we're providing in option 1 is a bike path for expert cyclists, not for your mums and dads, not for the grandmas like me. I wouldn't ride there, and definitely not for children. It's a compromise that I'm not prepared to take for safety reasons, and that's been a very strong message from the cycling community as well. So I know that we have to make a decision tonight, but I do implore you to consider that we go for option 3, which combines the concept of what we ultimately are hoping to get with option 1, but we get it now rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I've got Councillor Westwood next, then Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor, and apologies that I haven't got my camera on tonight. I'm currently at home with COVID, but didn't want to miss the meeting, so apologies for my scratchy voice and non-appearance via camera. I think we can all agree that the one thing we do agree on is that the Kingston CBD desperately needs an upgrade. It is quite disgraceful, really, that Tasmania's 5th largest municipal area has a CBD that looks like it currently does, and my understanding is that this has been on the cards for a long time, but that we have held off because we wanted to try and get it right. I think what we've proven is that there is never going to be a perfect right that suits every user group. We have been lobbied quite heavily by cyclists. The 742 responses to the survey did comprise a lot of cyclists, and I guess for me, in considering what the majority of the general public expect, option 1 strikes that balance for me. I think that the majority of our 40,000-ish residents would be very, very happy to see option 1 implemented. I think it does strike the right balance. I think it's a sensible solution, and I do thank staff for all the work they've done and for the way they've gone about engaging with all the different user groups. So I will certainly be supporting option 1, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood, and we appreciate that you are attending tonight while you're obviously quite unwell, so that's very much appreciated. I've got Councillor Midgley next, then I will make a contribution, and then and then we're probably at questions if anyone has questions, so I'll go to Councillor Midgley. Councillor Fox, your hand is still up also. Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Westwood. It's amazing that you're here while you have COVID. Mayor, I'd like to really start by thanking Mr. Kamazoglu for his time on this project, because not only has he been the project manager and covering Kingston Park project management, he's also engaged with a variety of stakeholders, listening to their needs, but also doing that real engagement component. And I think it's a real highlight from this project of the fact that we don't have an engagement officer in this space. So I thank you so very much for the work and the extra work that you've done for this, because you don't have that big team of people working alongside you. I agree with everybody that it really is an important project, and all ratepayers agree that we need to do something about this tired part of Kingston. And we are so fortunate that we have City Deal funding to transform Kingston. So we're making comment, Mayor and Councillors, but I also have quite a lot of questions just to pack further my understanding of this, because I do, at this stage, I do not support the recommendation that is put forward. And that comes from a stem of 20 years of attending sessions around Main Street in Kingston, Main Street across cities all over the world, activation of cities, and also I have been a cycling activist for 25 years, pushing for separated cycle lanes and safety. And now more than ever, we need to provide safe infrastructure for people, for active transport, with the increasing petrol prices, with climate change, and the increasing number of e-bikes that we're seeing across our municipality. Every time when I ride, I see more and more people riding, and more older people riding their e-bikes around Kingston. So the Kingston Place Strategy 2020-2050 outlined a vision for Central Kingston, and based on feedback we received from the wider community, the vision for Central Kingston sees it as a transition in a unified and legible regional centre where everything is well connected by walking and cycling links and public transport with green and engaging streets attractive to a range of retail, commercial and residential uses. So my first question is, when we engaged PlayScore to undertake the Kingston Place strategy, what was the purpose of engaging them?
Mr. Kamatsoglu, my understanding, just while he turns on, my understanding was that we were trying to establish a high-level vision in relation to what a staged approach would look like, not an actual design concept, but I guess a 30-year vision. But I'm sure Mr. Kamatsoglu can help us with that further, unless Dr. Stevenson wants to take it.
No, I'm happy to leave that to the project manager. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor, and thank you for your question, Councillor Midgley. So the purpose of the PlayScore engagement, excuse me while I just look to the side here because I've got some notes, was to collect the community metrics on what was important long term to not only the central Kingston area but the greater Kingston area as well. And it included the whole precinct, which is, and not just the Channel Highway. Obviously, we're focusing on the Channel Highway at the moment, but it includes the whole precinct of Central Kingston. And as you mentioned, 2020 to 2050 is a 50-year vision. The strategy has been developed to attract and guide further investment in Central Kingston. It identifies a shared place